Can you even imagine? Your own family. Not just an acquaintance, not some random developer, but your wife's brother. Standing there, smiling, offering to help, all while quietly, meticulously, trying to steal the very ground you'd spent 12 years bleeding for. Not just a piece of property, but my entire life's work. My dream. He wanted to buy it from the county for barely 1% of its value. Said it was worthless. It took me years to truly process that level of betrayal, to look back and connect all the tiny, insidious dots that led to that moment. Everything felt like a blur for a while, just a fog of adrenaline and anger. But now, almost a year later, the dust has finally settled. And it's time I told this story, because some lessons, well, they just cost more than others. Looking back, it all started when I was just 26, a couple of years into my marriage with Sarah. I was a union lineman then, the kind of guy who'd climb poles in a January ice storm or work 16-hour shifts when a transformer blew, all for that steady paycheck. And I saved almost every penny. My coworkers thought I was either broke or a little unhinged, living in a one-bedroom with second-hand furniture, driving a 10-year-old pickup, eating rice and beans most nights. But I had a plan. I wanted land. My own land. Something nobody could ever take from me. That's how I ended up buying 15 acres of the steepest, rockiest mountain land you could imagine, tucked away in southern Oregon. Real estate agents would just shake their heads at it. Too steep to build on without an engineering degree and a blank check. Too rocky for any traditional farming. The soil, the elevation, it was all wrong for anything that usually made money in these mountains. The previous owner had inherited it, paid taxes for 20 years, and never once set foot on it. When I offered him $12,000 cash, he practically bit my hand off. Sarah, my wife, though. I think she genuinely thought I'd lost my mind the first time I showed it to her. It was a north-facing slope in the foothills, about 40 minutes from Bend, down roads that got truly sketchy in winter. You accessed it by this rutted gravel track that washed out every spring. No utilities anywhere close. Not a single flat spot bigger than a basketball court on the whole 15 acres. Just a tangled mess of rocks, rhododendron thickets, and scrubby hardwoods clinging to the mountainside. She stood there, at the edge of the property, looking at that dizzying slope disappearing into the trees, and she asked, "So, what's the plan here, Daniel?" Because I'm not seeing a house, a road, or anything remotely normal. I just looked at her, a little grin playing on my lips. You're looking at it like a problem, honey. I'm looking at it like a setup. A setup for what? She asked, already picturing twisted ankles and ruined weekends. A setup for something amazing, I told her. Give me a few years, and you'll get it. She just sighed, a kind of exasperated affection in her voice. I married a man with ambition and zero fear. That's concerning. What I saw Christmas trees. That north-facing slope, rocky, well-drained soil, 3,000 feet up. Perfect conditions for Fraser firs. I knew those Chuzan-cut farms scattered across these mountains pulled in serious money during the 6 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Families drove hours from Portland, Seattle, even California, just to cut their own tree, buy a wreath, make those memories they'd repeat every year. But Fraser firs take 8 to 12 years to reach prime selling height. That's why nobody new entered the market. Too long to wait for your first real paycheck. But I had patience. And I had that union job funding the operation for as long as it took. I had 15 acres that nobody else wanted, because they couldn't see what I saw. Those first 3 years nearly broke me physically. Every day off from the power lines meant clearing brush, hauling rocks, cutting drainage channels by hand to prevent erosion on those steep sections, terracing the more gradual slopes into plantable rows. 12 hours on the lines, an hour drive, then clearing brush with a chainsaw until dark made it too dangerous. My hands were permanently torn up from saw work and granite edges. I dropped 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Some nights, I'd just crash in my truck because I was too exhausted to drive home safely. By year 3, I planted my first 2,000 Fraser fir seedlings. Each one, a tiny 18-inch sapling, root ball wrapped in burlap. Almost half of them died that first summer. I didn't understand my own drainage patterns yet. The low spots held too much moisture, and root rot took them. But I replanted the next spring, with better site selection, and put in another 1,500 seedlings in a new section I'd cleared. Years 5 through 7, I learned the real work of Christmas tree farming, shearing every summer to shape them into those dense, symmetrical forms customers expected. Spraying for pests. Mowing between rows. Fertilizing at precisely the right times. Each task had its own critical timing, or you'd set the whole operation back a year. I kept planting new sections each spring, building inventory for the future. By year 9, my oldest trees from that first surviving batch were finally 6 feet tall. I had trees at different stages of maturity all across the property now. The farm was actually starting to look like an operation. And that's when Sarah's brother, Mark, started coming around more often. He'd grown up in the county, knew everybody from the sheriff to the county clerk, worked in real estate and general contracting. Always had a deal working. He'd walk my tree rows, commenting on how much work I was putting into land that wasn't worth much on paper. He'd say it friendly enough, but something about the way he assessed the property always felt less like a compliment and more like a calculation. Year 10, I sold my first Christmas trees to the public. A simple choose-and-cut operation, a warming shed I'd built from scrap lumber, a cash box bolted to a table. That first season, I cleared $8,000 in 6 weeks. It was exhilarating. By year 12, the transformation was complete. I had Fraser firs in full rotation across all 15 acres, with new seedlings going in every spring to replace what we harvested. The inventory in the ground represented over 7,000 trees, from knee-high transplants to 9-foot specimens. I'd built a proper farm store, insulated, with a wood stove and display racks for the wreaths and garland we made from harvest trimmings. Nothing went to waste. Stumps got ground into mulch I sold to landscapers. We even added hot spiced apple juice and kettle corn on weekends. Families lingered longer, bought more. We hosted school field trips, scout groups. The county tourism board featured us alongside operations that had been running for generations. I quit the lineman job at the end of year 12. Hardest decision I ever made, walking away from union benefits and a guaranteed paycheck. But the farm was generating more annual revenue than my wages. I couldn't manage both anymore. Sarah handled the store and customer experience, I managed the trees and maintenance. We worked well together. Our marriage felt solid, built on shared purpose. Years 13 and 14, business grew steadily. Repeat customers brought their own kids. We expanded the store, added a small event space. Local papers did features on the lineman who turned worthless mountain land into a destination farm. And then, the letter arrived. It was early March of year 13, mixed in with seed catalogs and equipment invoices. An official county letter, formal language, talking about reviewing property boundaries due to potential survey errors from decades ago. It suggested our property might be smaller than our deed indicated. Some of our land, it said, might fall within an unrecorded county right-of-way. I called the assessor's office and got transferred between 4 different people before someone would actually discuss it. A woman with a bored voice said these reviews happened periodically when the county updated GIS mapping systems. Routine verification. Nothing to worry about. But I worried. The government doesn't send certified letters about property boundaries unless someone has a reason to question them. That Saturday, Mark showed up while I was checking trees in the upper field for winter damage. "Heard you got a letter from the county," he said, hands in his jacket pockets. Those things can turn into a mess fast. "It's just a boundary review, supposedly," I told him, already feeling a prickle of unease. "Sure. And sometimes supposedly turns into sign here. His eagerness felt wrong. Mark had always been mildly interested in the farm, but never this invested in county paperwork. Why do you care all of a sudden? I asked. Because your family, Daniel, he said, too quickly. And I know how this county plays. At dinner that night, I mentioned his visit to Sarah. She said Mark knew the county government better than anyone and was genuinely trying to help because we were family. Said I should take him up on it instead of being stubborn. But I didn't call Mark. Instead, I drove to the county clerk's office. Started pulling records. Our county had a public portal for most documents, anything else came with a simple written request. Surveys, deed chains, transportation committee minutes going back 3 years. 2 weeks later, it clicked. The county had been discussing a road improvement project for nearly 2 years. Widening and realigning the main route to the interstate. A legitimate project on paper, eliminating curves that had seen accidents. But the proposed alignment didn't follow the existing road. It cut across private property, requiring land from 7 owners. My 15 acres sat right in the middle of the preferred corridor. Then I found it. A developer called Consolidated Mountain Properties had been buying land on both sides of the proposed route for over 2 years. Their preliminary development plans showed a resort needing direct highway access. The road project wasn't about safety. It was about building infrastructure for private development with public money. And then Commissioner Robert Hayes's financial disclosures. They showed a consulting relationship with Blue Ridge Advisory Group. State corporate records showed Blue Ridge was a subsidiary of Consolidated Mountain Properties. And then I found Mark's name. Buyer agent for 3 of Consolidated Mountain's acquisitions, totaling over $2 million. Mark wasn't helping me navigate a process. He was working for the people trying to take my land. I told Sarah everything that night.